Hello and welcome back to the Stronger Than Steel podcast. My name is John Keir, and joining me, as always, is my co host Austin Davidson from Long Island, New York.
Heyo.
It is week 2 of the NFL season. Week 1 officially in the books now. It is Wednesday night. The Steelers are 1 0 after defeating the Cleveland Browns 21-18 in a game that I think most fans league wide and in Pittsburgh were thinking probably was a little closer than they were expecting. And the Steelers really didn't look all that great, particularly on offense. But some big news to get to for the Steelers. Just some the big injury news was Stephon Tuitt left after just, I believe it was 2 plays on defense. He blew up the first 2 plays of the game and then left with a biceps injury. It looked like early in the week after he didn't come back that it could be a season-ending injury. But as time has gone on, we've gone from Tuitt being potentially out for the year to maybe only missing half the season to perhaps he could play as early as this week. And while I don't think we expect that, it's definitely something to think about that the Steelers may have really dodged a bullet on defenses. Tuitt might be the Steelers' one of the most dominant players on the defense, and losing him for the season really would have hurt. What did you have to say about Stephon Tuitt's injury? What were you thinking when he went down?
Oh, I was scared because he obviously just got his big deal 2 days prior. 2 days prior. That's correct. And then he was immediately on the first play. You saw him applying pressure, and then the next play he went down. It was like super sad. It was like I don't know. He was like the rock of the defense, the defensive line last year. So with Cameron Hayward out all of last year, it just felt like he was the leader there. And losing him and now only having Cameron Hayward, it was just, I want both of them on the field at the same time. So that was scary for a little bit. I mean, at first I thought it wasn't that bad, I guess. At first I thought, he'll be out for a few plays. So like, it's questionable. But as time went on, I got more scared. And now it's gotten better with doctors only saying 1 to 2 weeks. Like, that's not bad at all. So that's what I think about it.
If he's ready to go, would you play him this week?
No. I would prefer to keep him healthy and just let what we have going go, because I don't even think maybe if this line was like the Vikings line was one of the best ones in the league, maybe I would think about it. But even if it was like, I don't know, the Oakland Raiders, I feel like I'd rather him healthy for the rest of the season than risk him getting even more hurt in one game. He's a difference maker, but when the Vikings' whole line is not that great in my opinion. I feel like pass rush could come from elsewhere. We don't really need Tuitt for this game. It would be nice if he was there, but I mean, I'd prefer him be healthy going forward.
I think it'd be more important to consider playing him if you were playing, say, Baltimore or Cincinnati on the road. A big game like that where losing is something you really can't afford, whereas you're playing 2 NFC opponents the next 2 weeks. Losing to them, while obviously you don't want that to be the case, it's a lot less important if you lose this game as opposed to losing to a team like any AFC team, especially one within your own division. So there's definitely no need to rush him back. If he's projected to come back in 2 or 3 weeks, I'd give him 3 or 4 weeks, give him maybe an extra week off just to make sure that he's in good shape when he does come back. What were your other takeaways from this game? Obviously, we know that it was a lot closer than we were originally anticipating. I believe you predicted a final score of 34-13.
I'm pretty sure it was close to that. It might have been only 31, but I honestly I can't remember.
You predicted 38-13.
Okay, yeah, I went really bold, but yeah, it seemed to me like the offensive line and Antonio Brown were the only ones on the field for most of the game. Even Roethlisberger looked shaky at times, missing throws and just being overall inaccurate for a lot of throws. I can't even say that overall. I apologize. He had 66.6% completion percentage. He just there were some extra bad inaccurate throws when they were made, to correct my statement. Next up, I think Todd Haley forgot Le'Veon Bell existed, or at least how to use him. The game plan seemed different than it was last year. It seemed flawed, in my opinion. Then after that, outside linebackers killed it in this game, minus Bud Dupree. Obviously, he wasn't playing, but Anthony Chickillo and T.J. Watt did fantastic. Then penalties killed. The Steelers had 13 penalties in this game for 143 yards, 5 of which resulted in a Browns first down, and that's just awful. So what were your quick takeaways from this game?
We already covered it really, but the offense really struggled this week with both game plan and execution, and they got away with it this week, but they're definitely going to have to be better. And on the other side of the ball, it was a great debut for T.J. Watt, and the defense played really well even without Stephon Tuitt, and they still have some things to work on, but it was an encouraging sign there, and the special teams played really well too, so that was good to see that they could pick it up when the offense wasn't playing its best game. So sticking with special teams, the Steelers' first touchdown of the year came before the offense even took the field. Tyler Matakevich blocks the Britton Colquitt punt, and Anthony Chickillo recovers it in the end zone for a touchdown. That was definitely the highlight for special teams, but elsewhere was a pretty solid day, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, that was obviously the big thing, the blocking the kick and then recovering it in the end zone, but they really excelled in other things like tackling and keeping Jabril Peppers contained on kickoffs and punt returns. Then Boswell hit all his PATs, which of course is a good thing, and Barry did decently punting. The one thing, he didn't nail any inside the 20. I guess the Steelers were backed up a lot, but
yeah, that's one thing that the special teams did not do, is that they didn't really flip the field for the Steelers offense.
Yeah, so that was a little rough, but I mean, other than that, his punts were still decent yardage. I think he averaged 45.9, if I remember correctly. And so nothing else to report there. But what wasn't so great, as we expected, were returns. Smith-Schuster had 1 return for 4 yards, which is pretty rough, and Eli Rogers returned 3 punts for 32 yards, which isn't that bad, but it's not great either. And that it's just part of the special teams that we're kind of going to have to accept for the year. I think after this, I'm not going to be disappointed, because I'm just going to expect them to not do well, but it's just a unit that's not – it's the part of the unit that's just not great, and I think we got to accept that. You can't be great everywhere. There's always going to be downsides to your team. What did you think of the special teams unit?
Pretty much exactly the same thoughts on the matter. The one thing I didn't like seeing was Jabril Peppers' 25-yard punt return. I felt like the Steelers missed some tackles on that play, and he should have been corralled sooner. Otherwise, I was actually pretty happy with Eli Rogers on punt returns. Obviously, we're not expecting him to break big ones like Antonio Brown is accustomed to doing, but the fact that he can hold on to the ball and get some positive yardage is the big takeaway for the punt returning, and I think that's important going forward. As far as kick returns go, there weren't any for Juju Smith-Schuster to field, minus the short pooch kick, which probably wasn't a great idea by the Browns there, but Smith-Schuster made the right decision by catching it and just taking a few steps before going down. He made the right move there. So I think overall it was a pretty good day for the special teams unit. Defensively, the Steelers' defense was out on the field for quite a bit of the early portion of this game, and they looked pretty good, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. The pass rush seemed to do really well this game. I could definitely say that. Mustering up 7 sacks, 2 from Chickillo, 2 from T.J. Watt, 1 from Joe Hayden, 1 from Javon Hargrave, and another from Cameron Hayward. There was just constant pressure on a line that I had previously thought to have improved in the offseason, so not too shabby. Then they did really well containing the run, keeping the Browns under 60 yards rushing, so not bad there either. But one thing I will say they did poorly was they gave up a lot of big plays in the passing game. Their top 4 receivers each had a long over 20 yards. Corey Coleman had a long of 23 yards. DeVal had a long of 21. Crowell had a long of 23. And Lewis had a long of 29. But other than that, I don't have many complaints other than the penalties, which I already mentioned in my quick takeaways. But both the offense and defense were responsible for the penalties, so I can't really pin it all on the defense. I just wanted to make a mention that they were part of the problem. What are your takeaways from the defense?
I think overall it was a pretty solid day for the defense. Anytime you can hold an opponent under 20 points, you're giving yourself a really good chance to win. Even when the offense played as poorly as it did on Sunday, they did what they wanted to do going into the game. They wanted to stop the run and force DeShone Kizer to beat them. And as a unit, the Browns rushed 25 times for just 57 yards, which is under 2.5 yards. So they did a good job there, and they did a good job getting after DeShone Kizer, even if him holding onto the ball was probably responsible for several of the sacks. they were able to get consistent pressure, and they did force a turnover, and the 7 sacks definitely influenced that. But I think that was a pretty good. They did a pretty good job there, and the coverage, yes, was okay. There were some things to improve on, but they didn't give up a excuse me. They didn't give up any killer plays that led directly to scores. So I think that was a big victory for the Steelers defense. And now we saved the best, or I guess the worst, for last in this case. The Steelers offense, which we've been talking for years now, 30 points per game, whether or not that's realistic or not. 14 points on offense provided by all one player, and elsewhere, Antonio Brown put the team on his back, or I guess the offense on his back. And so what else is new there?
Oh, this was just so frustrating to watch offensively. But before I go into that, I'm going to talk about what went well. The Steelers had 100% red zone efficiency and thus 100% goal to go efficiency as well. So when they made it there, they did well. What helped them do well is, as you mentioned, Jesse James, which was probably had his best game overall. It was his first with 2 touchdowns, and the first since 2012 when the Steelers had Keith Miller, that a tight end had 2 touchdowns in a game. And as well as also, you said, Antonio Brown putting the team on his back to make things happen. Then the offensive line did really well, only allowing 1 sack and not a lot of pressure at all. In fact, Marcus Gilbert didn't even allow a pressure the entire game. So what went poorly? Well, I've seen a lot of Steelers fans blaming Bell's poor performance on him skipping training camp, but I really put into question the game plan here. As I said earlier, it's as if they forgot how to use him correctly. They blamed penalties on not being able to get him going, but what I remember from last year is that Bell was fantastic on screens. I've already made allusions to this as well. And instead of running screens to him, they were continuously trying to force bubble screens to Martavis Bryant. It just didn't make sense to me. Even with all the penalties, I feel like Bell should have been used more on the ground as well. When it's 1st and 15, I feel like it's okay to rush. Even 2nd and 15, you can catch them off guard expecting a pass since it's 2nd and long and gain a few yards off of that. I'm not saying it's going to work every time because it won't. Football's more complicated than that, but it felt like they just gave up on the run game. They didn't even want to try it. It didn't feel like they gave it enough chances to say, oh, this is a complete failure. They just kind of tossed it under the rug. I just didn't like that. I would also like to point out that 2 of Bell's rushes that would have been made it for 10 yards or more got called back because of holding penalties. So he didn't do that bad at all, especially not as other fans think. Moving on to the next thing, Martavis Bryant, Eli Rogers, and especially Juju Smith-Schuster were missing from the game. Bryant and Rogers each only had 2 catches for a total of 25 yards combined. And Juju was more of a hurt than a help as he got no catches and 2 holding calls. Speaking of holding calls, again, penalties killed this unit as well as the defense. Both need more discipline. And that wraps it up for me. So what do you think went well and went poorly for the defense? I mean offense, my bad.
I think you covered it pretty well, Austin. This was a disappointing start. Several holding penalties and a poorly executed and planned game plan hampered the offense. It didn't help that they got on the field pretty much halfway through the first quarter, probably contributed to them starting slow. But even though the game plan in theory is a good idea, let me explain what the Steelers were thinking here. Greg Williams is an aggressive defensive coordinator, and he likes to walk up his safeties to the line of scrimmage, something that he did in 2010 when he was coaching the Saints defense. And he does this because he wants to dare the Steelers to throw the ball deep, which generally Ben Roethlisberger is definitely okay with doing. But I think the Steelers wanted to see if they could get a couple of big plays in the short passing game, particularly with those bubble screens. Really, all you have to do when the safeties are up close like that is make the cornerback miss out wide there. And I think the Steelers were thinking if they could get that and maybe get some plays done there, they might be able to open it up a little more for the running game and other passes. But it just never worked out. The holding penalties really slowed down the Steelers' offense, and poor performances from guys like Martavis Bryant, Vance McDonald, and Juju Smith-Schuster really slowed down the offense. And the Steelers didn't really do a good job of adjusting. Rather than just trying a few deep balls, I think, Roethlisberger only threw 4 deep passes the entire game, so more adjustments should have been made after the initial 2 drives that went nowhere. The offensive line, I thought, didn't have a great game. They were good in pass protection, but they struggled opening up holes for Bell, which isn't necessarily their fault, mind you. But I also feel like they didn't have their best game either, with several holding calls themselves, especially on a couple of key Le'Veon Bell runs. Luckily for the Steelers, Jesse James and Antonio Brown stood out in big ways, respectively, and Ben Roethlisberger played well enough in the key moments of the game to earn the win. So this week they got away with it, but next week they're definitely going to have to be better going forward. So let's look at individual aspects of the game. Give me one player on offense and defense for Pittsburgh that impressed you.
Before I go into that, I just want to go back to something that just interested me when you said that. Just so everyone knows, I honestly had no idea. I didn't hear the game plan before John just said that. I didn't realize that was the game plan. But what bothers me more about that is, and what sticks out to me in my head, from that game, all I could remember about the announcer saying was, wow, the safeties are very, very far back. Unusually, like 25 yards back.
No. May I, Austin? I'm sorry, I didn't explain this correctly. Yes, there were times when they had been walking the safeties up, but for the most part, they were keeping Jabril Peppers back like 25 yards, and they were walking up only one safety. So.
Oh, okay. It wasn't. Okay. All right. Never mind. Then I take it back, because at first I misinterpreted. I thought they had were expecting both safeties up, and they didn't alter their game plan to fit that. So, but okay. So then I'll go on to just who impressed on the offense. On offense, I'm going to give respect to the offensive line. Marcus Gilbert, when I saw the stat that he didn't even allow a pressure, I was amazed. That is so hard to do. For 28 minutes and 50 seconds to keep a man from even getting close to your quarterback, basically, regardless of the skill level of the man facing him, it just doesn't matter. That's impressive. I was just overall impressed, and hope this year that he gets the respect he deserves, because Marcus Gilbert is often a snub for most, like the top linemen for the Pro Bowl. He was snubbed last year. I just hope this season goes well for him. Who impressed you on offense?
Really quickly, I just wanted to apologize, Austin. I know I didn't really explain that very well, but my offensive standout this week, the guy who impressed me, was definitely Jesse James. I pointed him out as my X factor before the game, and I said that he was probably going to have to come through in a big way if he wanted to keep his starting job. Well, he played really well. 6 catches for 41 yards in both the Steelers' touchdowns on offense, outperforming Vance McDonald, who had 1 target and 1 drop. So he was pretty much invisible on the stat sheet. Outside of Antonio Brown, you can make a pretty good argument James was the best player on the Steelers' offense. He made it several big plays, including the first touchdown, where I just thought, I kept thinking back to this preseason when he wouldn't make those kinds of contested catches on those hard throws, but he made it this week, and he definitely seemed energized after the McDonald trade, and that's good to see that he may have been pushed to playing a little bit better by the McDonald trade. On the other side of the ball, who was someone that impressed you on defense?
Gotta give it to Anthony Chicklow. He wasn't even supposed to start. Bud Dupree got hurt later in the week, actually, after we did our podcast, so we didn't even have him on the injury report yet. And he became the starter this week and got 2 sacks. 2. It's so cool because right now in my fantasy league, the top 2 linebackers are T.J. Watt at 1 and Anthony Chicklow at the 2nd. So it's just cool to see. I mean, fantasy is kind of useless stats, but I don't know. I found that cool. Anthony Chicklow is such a great backup, and I'm so glad he's a Steeler, man. He's just great to have. Who impressed you on defense?
T.J. Watt. Now it's an easy one to go with here, but let's talk about the snap breakdown. T.J. Watt played all of 4 snaps on defense, meaning that James Harrison, the Steelers' all-time leader in sacks, a man who had, I believe, 2 sacks, at least 1 sack in Cleveland last year to become the all-time leader in Steelers sacks. He played only 4 plays in this game. That should tell you how highly the coaching staff has thought of this guy, even back when they named him the starter, pretty much since he got here. And it's clear right now that the Steelers coaching staff thinks he's a lot closer to being a star player, a well-rounded and polished player than they thought Bud Dupree was at this point in his career. And you still have to think James Harrison is one of the better Steelers pass rushers, but Watt was just on top of his game on Sunday, finishing with a team-high 7 tackles, had 2 sacks, and 1 athletic interception, which earned him the AFC's Defensive Player of the Week award. And he didn't always get consistent pressure, but when you have to consider the fact that he was going up against one of the best tackles in the league in Joe Thomas, someone who has generally stymied James Harrison, Watt looked really good. And that's something you really have to be encouraged going forward with that kind of performance. And you have to be really excited about that going forward. On the flip side, who was one player on offense of the many that disappointed you?
Oh, for me, it was easily Juju Smith-Schuster. Like I said, he didn't even add anything to the stat line. He wasn't even targeted. I actually apologize. He added something to the stat line, but it wasn't in like the wide receiver category. He made a tackle on the Ben Roethlisberger interception, but that was it. That was the only thing he did the whole entire game.
Oh, he did have, I guess, I know you're going to get to this, but he did show up on the stat line. He had more penalties than catches or tackles.
Yeah, that too. That's what I was about to say. The only thing he added were 2 holding calls that just made it worse for Le'Veon Bell and made me having to see all the hot takes that Le'Veon Bell is awful and is bad because he held out and his prime is over and everything is bad about Le'Veon Bell. So I honestly blame a lot of that on him because both of the holding calls brought back Le'Veon Bell rushes. And it's just so annoying to see. So that probably affected my decision a little bit. But who disappointed you on offense?
Defense. That was J.J. Wilcox. Now, it was kind of hard-pressed for me to find one here. As a unit, we already said they played pretty well for most of the game, but J.J.'s going to get it this week, not only for allowing the touchdown that made it a close game to Corey Coleman, who made a great play, by the way, but on the play, he had not only an illegal hit that warranted a flag and is likely going to get him a fine from the league office. The icing on the cake was that he knocked himself out with a very physical hit that Coleman held on to and seemed unfazed by. So it was a rough day for poor J.J. Wilcox, but otherwise I felt like he wasn't terribly out of position for someone who has just joined a new NFL team. So I guess it's not a complete loss, but it adds injury to insult when he gives up a touchdown and knocks himself out trying to break up the play. So he's my big loser on defense. What about you? Who was someone that fell flat on defense?
This was a hard one for me. It was kind of rough. I actually had to go back and watch some of the highlights, some of the things that in the All-22, because I couldn't really pinpoint it on anyone. And what I saw when I watched a lot of the highlights was Joe Hayden giving up a bunch of the big plays. I think 2 of them were on his side, on his man. And I was like, I guess he didn't do bad the entire game. I guess he gave up 2 big plays, and that was just enough to give him the disappointment. It wasn't really, he doesn't really deserve it, but he was the one that I could pick at. Yeah, so he gets it. But before we move on, I think you skipped your offensive disappointment.
That's correct. I did, Austin. I skipped it because I'm very tired and I wasn't thinking straight. So shame on me for skipping that. I'll just mention it quickly because I've already talked about him a little bit, but Martavis Bryant. I felt like this was the game we were finally going to see him return to form, but only 2 catches for 14 yards on 6 targets seems to indicate to me that Ben Roethlisberger doesn't have complete faith in Martavis Bryant right now for whatever reason that is. The screens that they threw him early, I felt like we're trying to get the 2 of them established with a connection, but we never really saw a deep pass attempted with Bryant minus the interception, which wasn't a good throw anyways, or rather it was a bad decision. So it may take some time before they finally connect on a consistent basis again, but I think we better see it start happening soon because they had all preseason to get it worked out, and this was supposed to be the tune-up game. So let's hope that they're on the same page now because 2 catches for 14 yards from your number 2 receiver is just not going to cut it. So moving on, also I just wanted to mention about Joe Hayden. He did have a pass breakup, and I feel like he didn't have the best game, but I felt like he also wasn't terrible. The other play that sticks out